Joining us now, national co-chair of the Harris-Walz campaign, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. Thank you for being with us. Welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks, Shannon. Great to be on with you. I look forward to seeing you in Chicago.
We will see you here. In the meantime, let's talk about what we've gotten from the vice president so far. A bit of an economic rollout on Friday. Reaction, one of them post-speech, was this: the Times demands serious economic ideas, but Harris supplied gimmicks. They say her ideas would cost money, but the campaign didn't specify in its offsets, its economic plan rollout. Without them, her plan would cost $1.7 trillion in addition to the federal deficits over a decade. They went on to say even adjusting for the pandering standards of campaign economics, Ms. Harris' speech Friday ranks as a disappointment. That's not a far-right appraisal. It's a Washington Post. They're not buying it, Senator.
Well, Shannon, one of the most important pieces of Vice President Harris's economic policy rollout this week was the announcement that the 10 most expensive prescription drugs, which have now had to negotiate with the federal government under Medicare because of a vote where she cast the deciding vote, legislation that Biden-Harris passed and Trump would reverse. It's going to reduce $6 billion in federal expenditures. It's going to save seniors $1.5 billion in out-of-pocket costs, and there's more to come. Her proposals included prescription drug price costs, incentives for housing production to make housing more affordable, support for the costs of childcare. Shannon, these are all things that middle-class working Americans are concerned about. And President Trump just this past week rolled out his proposal for essentially a national sales tax, a new 20% tariff on all imported goods. That would raise costs by thousands and thousands of dollars for every American. Remember, a tariff is paid by consumers. It's the equivalent of a new Trump tax. And he didn't offer any offsets or how to pay for that either.
Okay, we're going to talk to J.D. Vance about that coming up because it is something they do need to answer, this issue about tariffs. But on this issue of the prescription drugs, I think all Americans want to celebrate that. Everybody needs relief in that place. But the Committee for the Responsible Federal Budget says that is just a drop in the bucket to what the vice president proposed on Friday. It is not anywhere near an offset. And they talked about as well this issue of price gouging and of these, housing $25,000 to a number of first-time home buyers. So let's walk through some of that. On the issue of price gouging, there is a lot of pushback from economists across the board. One of them says this: when your opponent calls you communist, maybe don't propose price controls. They say it could lead to shortages, black markets, and hoarding. At worst, it might accidentally raise prices. And here's economist E.J. Antoni on that.
Please explain to me how Ms. Harris's policies are not, in fact, aligned with the communist ideology when she's talking about trying to artificially set prices for, I don't care if it's food or rent, you name it. If you employ the same policies as we have had in these other communist countries around the world, you will get the same results here.
Federal government tried it in the 1970s, Senator. It didn't end well. And economists across the political spectrum say it's a bad idea.
Well, let's be clear. I know Kamala Harris believes in the free market. What she put out in her proposals includes tax incentives for us to increase the production of housing. And yes, reductions in the prices that seniors pay for prescription drugs. I don't think there's anything communist about wanting to make housing more affordable and prescription drugs more affordable.
But specifically to the issue of price gouging, if you're setting prices, a lot of people feel like that is communist in nature. Housing aside, let's talk about price gouging and price controls.
Shannon, presidents of both parties have tried to use the power of the FTC to rein in high prices at the pump, high prices at grocery stores. I think picking this one proposal of the many she's put out misses the broader point, which is that Vice President Harris is continuing the work of President Biden in reducing costs faced by working Americans. And as for an offset, President Trump wants to make permanent the nearly $5 trillion in tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans and the most profitable companies that he passed on a party line vote in 2017. Just last month, Republicans in the Senate blocked a bill that came over from the House, the Republican-controlled House, that would have expanded the child tax credit and small business credits. We need to know why Republicans in the Senate want to block progress in reducing costs for small businesses and for families.
Well, the good news is both tickets seem to agree they want to expand the child tax credit. So maybe there is a rare point of agreement between these two. On the tax issue, because this comes up quite a bit, I want to point back to something in The Hill. They cite government data and say this: income data published by the IRS clearly show that on average, all income brackets benefited substantially from the Republicans' tax reform law, with the biggest beneficiaries being working and middle income filers, not the top 1%, as so many Democrats have argued. That's IRS data, Senator.
Yeah, and that's frankly just not true. That by dramatically cutting the corporate tax rate and by reducing taxes on the wealthiest Americans, the dollar benefits, they're talking percentages. In terms of the dollar benefits, it is the wealthiest Americans who benefited enormously. Here's the bigger point. It exploded our deficits. The national deficit and the increase in the national debt was greater under former President Trump than it has been under President Biden. And we need to find a path forward that pays for the tax incentives that we're talking about. I would vote, and I believe Vice President Harris would support, for allowing some of those 2017 tax cuts to sunset as a way to increase things like the child tax credit, incentives for the production of more affordable housing, and incentives for things like childcare, and a first child, which are a key piece of the Harris-Walz economic proposals that were rolled out this week.
Let's turn to foreign policy, because I want to make sure we hit on this as well. We haven't heard much from the vice president about this. It clearly, as commander-in-chief, would be a very full table for her should she come into it. Something she's part of the administration handling now. There's been a lot of attention to the fact that, when it came to Afghanistan, the way and the timing and the way in which that withdrawal was done, she has stood by that decision. I want to play something she said when asked about it in 2021.
President Biden always said that he wants you to be the last person in the room, particularly for big decisions, just as he was for President Obama. He just made a really big decision, Afghanistan.
Yes.
Were you the last person in the room?
Yes.
And you feel comfortable?
I do.
So she stands by that. Of course, we lost tragically 13 young American service members, many, many more injured. We left tens of thousands of people behind that we told we were going to get out of that country. Why should American voters trust her as commander-in-chief if she stands by that foreign policy decision?
Well, two things. We have worked hard on a bipartisan basis to provide support for those who served in Afghanistan alongside us and to continue to get them out of the country. Tens of thousands have come to the United States over the past 2 years. And I think we need to continue to work to make sure that Afghans who come to the United States get the support that they deserve for the fight they were involved in alongside our brave troops for so many years. Second, I was with Vice President Harris at the Munich Security Conference earlier this year and the previous year, where she gave strong, clear-eyed, and forceful speeches about the importance of NATO, the importance of fighting for democracy, something that J.D. Vance does not agree with, that we need to continue to push back on Putin's aggression in Russia and to strengthen our alliances around the world. The only time NATO deployed in defense of another NATO nation was to Afghanistan on behalf of the United States. That's the only time Article 5 was invoked and NATO troops deployed was after 9/11. And I think the way that we do our best for the memory of those Americans and those NATO troops who served and made the ultimate sacrifice in Afghanistan was to continue to strengthen the NATO alliance, as President Biden has and as Vice President Harris will, and to not abandon our partnerships and our alliances with democracies, as former President Trump has threatened to do. Look, Shannon, if you ask the former president's Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, and Chief of Staff, a decorated Marine veteran himself, they are all not voting for Donald Trump. There's a core reason for that. They don't think he should be anywhere near the Oval Office again. And I'd encourage you to ask J.D. Vance about what Donald Trump said just this week about the Congressional Medal of Honor, something that was denounced by the VFW.
I have a lot of questions for the senator coming up, but this is the visual we got this week. 3 years out from Bagram Air Base, we've got the Taliban parading with our equipment, with our base that we left behind. That's a tough visual, and one that people feel like this administration wholly owns, and that includes the vice president. Senator, we'll get to all kinds of questions with Senator Vance, maybe some of yours. It's always good to see you, and we'll see you here in Chicago.
Thank you, Shannon.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.